AITA for my reaction when my wife got exposed after leaving with her coworker. My life comes down to metal and fire. I own a custom barbecue smoker and grill fabrication business. I do not make supermarket products. I build heavy, hand-welded structures designed to last for generations. My hands are marked by grease, scars, and physical labor. Marks I wear with pride because they represent something solid in a world of appearances. 3 years ago, I finished paying off my mortgage. My stability is real, not a corporate mirage. I have 4 children, and, until recently, I believed I had a solid marriage. My wife was the polar opposite, a corporate marketing executive, elegant, calculating, and with limitless ambition. For years we thought we were the perfect match. I provided the tangible, the 5,000 square foot workshop behind our suburban home, and the economic foundation. She provided the facade, the contacts, and the social polish. However, that balance began to rot. Over time, she stopped inviting me to her work events. She said I did not fit into her environment, that my way of speaking was too simple, and that my presence made her colleagues uncomfortable. I became the absent husband while I focused on my children and my workshop, convinced that this distance was normal in couples with such different worlds. Everything changed last Thursday. She appeared at the door of my workshop with an order, not an invitation. You have to come to the company party this year. It was not a request, it was an obligation. The event would be at a luxury hotel downtown. I knew that night was not about celebrating, but about something much darker. I agreed and prepared to enter hostile territory, not knowing she had already planned my humiliation. For her to demand I accompany her after 5 years of hiding me was a red flag impossible to ignore. I put on my best gray suit, the same one I wore to my father's funeral, and dressed up as best I could, even though I felt out of place. She, on the other hand, wore a flawless red dress and spent hours perfecting her image. Upon entering, I understood her effort. The ballroom was full of people who looked like they stepped out of a luxury catalog, drinking expensive liquor and moving with a natural arrogance. As soon as we crossed the threshold, she transformed. She moved through the crowd with an unfamiliar ease, laughing with strangers and using corporate jargon. She introduced me with reluctance, like someone introducing a minor employee. This is my husband. He makes grills. Immediately after, she would change the subject, erasing me from the conversation before I could say a word. I was a simple accessory, a footnote in her social climb. Then the head of her department appeared. He was my polar opposite, flawless, with a meticulously groomed appearance and that irritating confidence of someone who has never had to get his hands dirty to survive. As soon as she saw him, her face lit up in a way I had not seen in years. Her eyes shone with an intensity that no longer belonged to me. The closeness between them was immediate and shameless. They talked about projects and work dinners with a familiarity that made me feel the weight of the betrayal before it was even explicitly evident. I was right there next to her, but to her and that man, I was invisible. They shared private jokes and talked about extra nights at the office. When he finally acknowledged me, he gave me a handshake loaded with arrogance and dropped a condescending comment about my existence. Then the unforgivable happened. He pulled out a bill, threw it on the table in front of me, and looking at me mockingly, declared, "Do not worry, champ. I will take good care of her tonight." The table erupted in laughter. My wife's colleagues, drunk on status and expensive alcohol, celebrated the humiliation as if it were the best joke of the night. She, after a second of hesitation, joined in the laughter. I stood motionless looking at the bill on the table while the sound of their laughter drilled into my ears. It was at that moment when something broke for good. With steady hands despite the fury, I took the bill, folded it precisely, and looked the guy straight in the eyes. "Thank you," I said with a calmness that silenced the neighboring tables. "Consider it in advance for your medical expenses." The silence that followed was absolute. My wife turned pale as I buttoned my jacket and left the hall without looking back. I heard her voice calling me in the distance, but it meant nothing anymore. I got into my pickup truck and drove back home with the bill burning a hole in my pocket. She did not return that night. I stayed in the workshop until 3 in the morning, changing my dress shirt for a work shirt and taking refuge in welding. Every spark was an outlet for the rage. I tried calling her twice. Both calls went straight to voicemail. I knew exactly where she was and with whom. The man who had bought me for a bill was now with my wife, and she had accepted the deal. At 4:30 in the morning, I turned off the torch. The cold in the workshop was brutal, but it helped keep my mind clear. I poured myself a coffee and waited for dawn. Then, the phone vibrated with a bank notification. She had paid for a $400 suite at the same hotel at 1:47 in the morning with our joint card. I took screenshots, saved them, and emailed them to myself. I am not naive. Divorce courts feed on documentation. When the sun began to rise, I heard the engine of her car pulling into the garage. I stayed in the workshop watching from the window as she tiptoed into the house, like a teenager trying to beat curfew. I waited 10 minutes. I wanted her to think I was still asleep, that her lie had a chance to survive. I crossed the yard and entered through the back door. I found her in the kitchen in front of the coffee maker. Her makeup was smudged, and she was wearing a man's jacket with her boss's initials embroidered on the pocket. The cynicism of wearing her colleague's garment to enter our home was astonishing. "Are you up early?" she asked with a voice that tried to be innocent but sounded guilty. "I have not slept," I replied. "Where were you?" She let out a nervous laugh and started with the planned script, that the party went late, that several colleagues stayed in a suite, and that she fell asleep on a couch. She pointed to the jacket, saying her boss had lent it to her because she was cold. An absurd explanation for someone who had just spent hours in a climate-controlled hotel. That was when I saw it. On her neck, there was a reddish mark, perfectly round and unmistakable. At her age, my wife was coming home with a visible mark suggesting an intimate encounter. "You have something on your neck?" I said, pointing at the mark with one finger. Her hand flew to her neck, trying to cover up. The panic on her face quickly turned into that defiant attitude she uses when she runs out of excuses. "I must have burned myself with the hair straightener," she babbled. "You know how clumsy I am." I closed my eyes for a second. After years of marriage, that was the lie she had chosen to bury our life together. She continued acting with a disturbingly calm normalcy. She made coffee, hummed songs, and asked what we wanted for Christmas dinner, all while wearing another man's jacket. I watched her stir her sugar 7 times, following her usual superstition to avoid bad luck. She did not know her luck had run out. I spent Saturday in absolute silence, ignoring her attempts to pretend nothing was happening. She retreated to the guest room, an admission of guilt clearer than any confession. On Sunday at 6 in the morning, I headed to the hardware store. There was something purifying about the idea of fixing my life with tools. I bought 4 maximum security deadbolts, the kind that do not rely on apps or codes, but on a physical key that only I would possess. When I returned, she was still sleeping. I began the work with the precision of a surgeon, removing the old hardware and replacing it with parts that symbolized a physical and emotional boundary gave me immense satisfaction. My oldest son woke up and watched me work. He did not need many explanations. The tension in the house spoke for itself. "Does Mom know about this security upgrade?" he asked. "She is about to find out," I replied. He helped me with the last 2 doors. I handed him his copy of the keys with a clear instruction. "Do not give them to your mother under any circumstances." By noon, the 4 entrances to the house were fortresses. She left shortly after for her yoga class, trying to keep up the farce of a normal routine. I responded with the indifference of a rock. I knew that would be the last time she would leave that house as its owner. At 6:30 in the evening, I heard her car in the driveway. I sat on the couch with a beer, pretending to read, while my son waited upstairs with his door ajar. I heard her footsteps on the porch, the jingling of keys, and finally the sound of metal clashing against a lock that no longer recognized her. There was a silence followed by a second, more violent attempt. She forced the key from her keychain over and over until reality hit her. She started shouting my name from the other side of the door, but by the time I got up to open it, she was no longer part of this home. I opened the door with calculated slowness. She stood there breathing heavily with the keys clutched in her hand like a useless weapon. Her expression went from confusion to rehearsed indignation in a matter of seconds. "The keys are not working," she snapped, trying to push past me to get inside. I did not move. I stood firm in the doorway, blocking her path. "It is not that they do not work," I told her in a flat voice. "It is that you no longer have keys to this house." She froze. She tried to cause a scene, raising her voice so the neighbors who were already starting to watch from their yards would hear her. She accused me of being crazy, of being paranoid, and of keeping her out of her own home. But I was no longer the man who felt uncomfortable at her corporate parties. Now I was the master of the situation. "This house is in my name, and the mortgage is paid for with my work," I declared. "You can call whoever you want, but what you are not going to do is come inside after having been involved in that inappropriate relationship and having that mark from him on your neck." At the mention of the mark, her posture crumbled. The hair straightener accident excuse no longer had a place in this conversation. Then I took out my phone and showed her the screenshot of the hotel bill. $400 paid with our joint fund while I waited for her in the workshop. The silence that followed was heavy. "Your suitcases are in the garage," I continued. "My son already took care of bringing them out. I suggest you call that guy who thinks my dignity is worth $10. Maybe he has an available couch, since you were the one who paid for the room last night." She tried to cry, resorting to the last option of someone who knows they are cornered, but I felt nothing. There was no anger, only the satisfaction of a job well finished. I closed the door and turned the new key. That night, as she drove away in the car I helped her buy, I sat in my workshop. The $10 bill was still on my workbench. I used it to light the blowtorch and start a new project. She took her fake glamour and her cheap lies. I kept my children in my house. Despite the contained fury, I forced myself not to act on impulse. The response arrived in a thick envelope, a formal petition for divorce. She not only wanted the separation, she demanded lifelong alimony and half of my business. She claimed 50% of what I built from scratch in a garage, the same one she always despised for considering it too blue-collar for her social circle. Now that simple work was her financial target. I called my trusted lawyer. His response was immediate and professional. "Prepare for a legal war." The next day, I showed up at his office with a box containing my entire financial life, bank statements, accounting records, and tax returns. Waiting for me, there was a forensic accountant, a specialist in tracking hidden money. "I am very good at finding money when people think no one is looking," she told me with an icy confidence. I handed her the file of my financial records. She began organizing the chaos with mechanical efficiency. My net worth was not negligible. A $450,000 house, a business with annual profits of $300,000, and several savings accounts. But the turning point came when I mentioned the hotel charge from the night of the betrayal. "She used our joint credit card," I explained, "the one linked to my business account for commercial expenses." The accountant's expression changed. Her eyes shone with the intensity of someone who had just detected a fatal weakness in the enemy. "If she used your business funds for personal expenses, and those expenses were declared as business deductions, we are not just talking about the betrayal," she declared. "We are talking about possible misappropriation of funds, tax implications, and fraud. Commercial accounts are governed by different rules." She estimated she would have a full report in 3 days. For the first time in weeks, I stopped feeling like a victim. It was no longer just about marital betrayal. She had made the mistake of mixing her personal affairs with my business ledgers. We were ready to go from defense to offense. The forensic accountant did not take long to find the crack. After accessing the bank transactions, the picture turned out to be much dirtier than expected. In the last 6 months, my wife had spent over $40,000 using my business credit card. The records showed a trail of deceit: 11 stays at the luxury hotel, dinners at expensive restaurants, spa visits, and designer purchases, all charged to my business account. But the definitive finding was a series of systematic transfers from our joint account to a recently created consulting firm. Upon tracking down the owner of that entity, the name appeared. It was the man from the party. My wife was not only involved in an inappropriate relationship, she was financing her colleague's lifestyle with my own money. "This nullifies any claim for alimony," my lawyer assured. "No one can claim financial need while squandering thousands of dollars in hotels and financing a third party with misappropriated funds." With that evidence, the divorce trial was not a battle, it was an execution. My lawyer presented the evidence of the misappropriation to the judge, the purchase receipts, the hotel bills, and the most devastating part, the direct transfers to the colleague under the guise of a fake consulting firm. Finding herself cornered, my now ex-wife tried to cry, claiming that I was a cold man who had pushed her to seek affection elsewhere. But in court, numbers have no feelings. The judge was blunt. Her right to alimony was immediately voided by the fraudulent use of my business assets. Not only did she not receive a dime in support, but she was forced to return all the money she had siphoned off, subtracting it from her share of the division of assets. I managed to keep full ownership. The judge ruled that she had no right to claim part of a business she had tried to take advantage of improperly. The house also stayed with me. We proved that the mortgage was paid off with income she did not generate, and that her conduct put the stability of our children's home at risk. Leaving the courthouse, I watched the scene from a distance. He was there, leaning against his car in front of the courthouse with that predator smile of someone who thinks he just caught the biggest prize. For the colleague, my ex-wife's divorce was a business deal. He was waiting for the moment she would walk out with the loot that would allow him to live without ever working again. When my ex-wife walked through the courthouse doors, he approached with a triumphant stride. "Well?" he asked with undeniable greed. "How much is the settlement for?" "We own half of his business now." She could not even meet his gaze. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, holding the ruling that had just turned her dreams of wealth into ashes. "There is nothing," she replied with a broken voice. My ex presented everything: the hotel bills, the luxury purchases, and above all, the transfers to your consulting firm. The judge classified it as fraud and misappropriation. The man's smile vanished instantly. The colleague's warmth evaporated, giving way to an absolute coldness. "What do you mean there is nothing?" he snapped with contempt. "I lost my job over this mess. I risked my position believing you would be my financial backing. You told me that guy was an idiot we were going to take advantage of. I have no house, no alimony, and no savings," she sobbed, trying to seek his support. "Everything I was entitled to was used to pay the debt for the money we siphoned off, but we have each other." He let out a venom-filled laugh and took a step back, as if her ruin were a disease. "Each other?" he mocked. "I was looking for a life of luxury, not a divorced woman without a penny and a fraud case over her head. Figure your own life out, because you have no future with me." He got into his car and drove off without looking back, leaving the woman alone on the sidewalk. She stood there, looking tiny, realizing that the man for whom she destroyed her life was nothing more than a parasite feeding off someone else's success. From across the street, I simply walked away. I started my pickup truck and drove away from the courthouse without looking back. In the rearview mirror, I saw my ex-wife collapsed on the sidewalk, but my mind was already on my business, my children, and the freedom I had just regained. I took the back road to avoid the downtown traffic, seeking the quiet of the drive. About 3 miles down, traffic came to a halt. The blue and red lights of patrol cars bounced off the trees. A light pole hung dangerously, snapped in half by a serious impact. As I crept forward at a walking pace, I saw the car. It was the colleague's car. It was smashed against the concrete, badly damaged. I stopped for a moment, just long enough for the paramedics to cover the driver's area with a white sheet. Speed and desperation to escape a life without money had led him straight to disaster. The guy who contemptuously threw $10 at me had not even made it to the next highway exit. I felt no joy, just a strange sense of order. Steel does not lie. If you hit it hard enough and the wrong way, it breaks. He had tried to live on a house of cards. At the first gust of reality, his world came crashing down. I drove past the wreckage, smelled the burnt rubber, and kept going. Fate had not only taken his paycheck and the inappropriate relationship, it had collected the final bill all at once. I adjusted my rearview mirror to stop looking at the remains and accelerated. 3 months later, the workshop was finally my peaceful refuge again. But one afternoon, just as I was finishing closing the main gate, she appeared. There was nothing left of the arrogant woman who used to parade around luxury parties. She was standing on the sidewalk with an old suitcase and unkempt clothes. The friend who had taken her in had gotten tired of supporting her and had asked her to leave that very morning. Now the street was her only reality. "Please," she told me with a broken voice. "I have nowhere to go. I have gone hungry and I do not have a dime. I made a mistake, I know, but help me. Just for a few days, for the years we lived together." I looked at her through the bars. I did not feel the pain from before, not even hate. Just a total indifference, as if I were looking at a piece of rusted metal that is no longer good for anything. "You are not here out of love or regret," I replied coldly. "You are here because you ran out of other people's money and you have no one else to manipulate. The guy you were giving my money to is gone, and your friends have already shut the door on you. I am on the street, I have nothing, she sobbed, clinging to the gate. I pulled a $10 bill from my pocket and dropped it on the ground on the other side of the gate. It landed right in the dirt at her feet. There you go. It is the same value you threw in my face at that party, I declared. Use it to buy yourself something to eat, because it is the last thing you will ever get from me. My children no longer mention you, and I have already erased you from my life. She stood there, humiliated, bending down to pick up the bill as tears dirted her face. I did not stay to watch. I turned around and walked away. Comment: I really appreciate how this story reminds me that protecting my own peace is never selfish. When someone crosses our boundaries, it's okay to stand firm without guilt. I've learned that true self-respect starts with choosing ourselves first, even when it's hard. You deserve a life where your worth is not measured by someone else's choices. Taking responsibility for our healing is one of the most powerful things we can do. It's about building a foundation that no one can shake. Kindness to ourselves matters just as much as kindness to others. Choosing calm over chaos has changed how I show up in my own life. I hope this encourages you to reflect on the relationships that truly lift you up. Let's keep supporting each other to create lives filled with real respect and quiet strength. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.